The massive starship drifted through space like a metal mountain. Its hull gleamed silver against the black void, covered in symbols that spoke of power and conquest. Inside the command center, tall figures in flowing robes studied glowing screens that showed a small blue planet. Commander Zexathari stood 8 feet tall, his forearms crossed behind his back. His skin was pale blue and his eyes were large and black like pools of oil. Around him, dozens of other Zephyrians worked at their stations, their movements precise and efficient. They had done this many times before. "Report," Zexathari commanded, his voice deep and echoing in the vast chamber. A younger officer turned from her screen. "The third planet shows signs of primitive life, Commander. They call themselves humans. Our scans show they have barely reached their own moon using chemical rockets. Their weapons are simple projectiles powered by explosive powder. Their technology is at least 3,000 years behind ours." Zexathari nodded slowly. This was exactly what he expected to hear. In his long life, he had conquered 47 worlds. Each time was the same story. The Zephyrian Empire found a primitive world, offered them a chance to surrender, and then took what they wanted. It was efficient. It was proven. It had never failed. The Empire stretched across 847 star systems. Billions of beings bowed before Zephyrian might. Their ships could cross the galaxy in days. Their weapons could crack planets in half. Their shields could turn away any attack. They were the masters of space, and every thinking creature in the galaxy knew it. "How many of them are there?" Zexathari asked. "Approximately 8 billion, Commander. They are divided into many small nations that fight each other regularly. They seem incapable of working together even when facing outside threats. Their largest weapons can only destroy cities, not continents." Another officer spoke up. "Commander, should we follow standard annexation protocols? Send diplomats first, offer them client status in exchange for resources and labor?" Zexathari considered this for a moment. The standard protocols existed for a reason. They gave primitive species a chance to join the Empire peacefully. Most chose surrender over destruction. It was logical and efficient. But something about this planet annoyed him. Perhaps it was how isolated they were, tucked away in this forgotten corner of the galaxy. Perhaps it was how pathetically weak their technology appeared. Or perhaps it was simply that he had not conquered a world in over 2 years, and he missed the satisfaction of absolute victory. No, he decided. They are too primitive to be useful as clients. We will give them the standard surrender ultimatum. 72 hours to submit completely or face annihilation. The bridge fell silent. Even among the Zephyrians, known throughout the galaxy for their ruthless efficiency, this was considered extreme. To skip diplomacy entirely meant they intended to destroy rather than rule. "Commander," the young officer said carefully, "our scouts report the humans have no unified government. Who would accept their surrender?" "That is their problem to solve," Zexathari replied coldly. "If they cannot organize themselves in 72 hours, then they deserve extinction." He turned to the communications officer. "Open a channel to their planet. Broadcast on all their primitive frequencies." The officer's hands moved across his console, and soon a soft chime indicated the connection was active. Every radio, television, and communication device on Earth would now receive their message. Zexathari stepped forward, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of dominance. When he spoke, his words were translated into every human language simultaneously. "Primitive species of the third planet, I am Commander Zexathari of the Zephyrian Empire. Your world has been selected for imperial annexation. You have 72 of your rotations to surrender unconditionally. Gather your leaders. Prepare your submission. Resistance is futile and will result in the complete sterilization of your planet." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. This was always his favorite part. The moment when a species realized how small and helpless they truly were. Do not mistake our patience for weakness. The Empire spans 800 star systems. We have conquered countless worlds. Our technology is beyond your understanding. Our weapons can shatter moons. Your primitive projectile weapons and chemical rockets are toys compared to our might. Behind him, tactical displays showed the approaching Zephyrian fleet, 3,000 warships, each one capable of destroying entire cities with a single blast. The largest ships in the fleet were planet crackers, massive vessels designed to break worlds apart from the inside out. You cannot hide. You cannot run. Your choice is simple. Kneel before the Empire or cease to exist. You have 72 hours. The transmission ended. Around the bridge, Officers returned to their duties with the calm efficiency of those who had done this job many times before. They began preparing landing zones, calculating resource extraction rates, and planning occupation logistics. Zexathari expected the usual response: panic, chaos, desperate attempts at communication, pleas for mercy, perhaps some foolish attempts at resistance that would be crushed in moments. What he did not expect was silence. For 6 hours, Earth sent no response at all. The Zephyrian communication officers checked and rechecked their equipment, wondering if the primitive human technology had simply failed to receive their message. Then the first response came. It was not from any government or military leader. It was a single message, broadcast on the same frequencies the Empire had used, but somehow amplified so that every ship in the Zephyrian fleet received it clearly. The voice was human, speaking in accented galactic standard that somehow carried an undertone of amusement. "You picked the wrong species. We'll be waiting," that was all. Zexathari stared at the communication console, his black eyes narrowing. In 300 years of conquest, no species had ever responded to Imperial ultimatum with such casual dismissal. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're detecting massive increases in their primitive internet traffic. They appear to be laughing at us." "Laughing?" "Yes, sir. They're creating what they call memes about our message. Images and jokes mocking our appearance and our threats." Zexathari felt something he had not experienced in decades: confusion. Every species they encountered reacted to Imperial might with fear. Terror was universal. Fear was logical. Laughter was not. "Show me," he commanded. The main screen filled with human communication intercepts. Pictures of Zephyrian ships labeled with mocking text. Videos of humans making jokes about alien invasions. Forums where millions of humans discussed the message not with panic, but with something that looked almost like anticipation. One message, posted by someone identified only as Space Marine 2157, particularly caught his attention. "Finally, I was wondering when you guys would show up. 3,000 ships? That's adorable. Did you bring enough?" Zexathari stood motionless for long minutes, processing this impossible response. In his experience, only 2 types of species reacted to Imperial threats without fear: those too stupid to understand their situation, and those powerful enough not to care. Humans could not possibly be the latter, could they? Admiral Sarah Chen floated in the zero gravity of Command Station Omega, watching the alien fleet approach through displays that showed every angle of the solar system. Around her, dozens of technicians worked quietly at stations that looked nothing like the primitive electronics the aliens had observed on Earth. The station itself was hidden beyond Pluto, wrapped in fields that bent light and energy around it like a stone diverts water. To any scanner, this region of space appeared completely empty. The Zephyrians had no idea they were being watched by technology that made their own sensors look like children's toys. "Fleet composition confirmed," reported Lieutenant Torres from his station. 3,000 vessels ranging from destroyers to planet crackers. Standard Imperial formation. They're not even trying to hide their approach. Sarah nodded grimly. She had studied Zephyrian tactics for 50 years, ever since humanity's first contact with the Empire. That contact had not gone well, but the aliens never realized they had actually encountered humans at all. The year was 2157. But Earth's calendar meant nothing to the vast civilization that humanity had become. While the Zephyrians believed they were approaching a primitive world barely capable of spaceflight, they were actually entering a solar system that had been transformed into the most sophisticated fortress in the galaxy. "Ma'am," called Specialist Park from the sensor station, "the aliens are beginning their approach vector to Earth. They're moving in the exact pattern our prediction suggested." "Of course they are," Sarah replied. "Arrogance makes people predictable." She touched a control on her console, and the main display shifted to show Earth itself. To casual observation, it looked exactly as the aliens expected. A blue-green world with primitive cities, simple satellites, and basic space stations. Chemical rocket launches still occurred on schedule. Radio and television broadcasts continued their regular programming. What the aliens could not see were the modifications hidden beneath every major city, the quantum generators buried in Earth's crust, or the massive weapon arrays disguised as communication towers. Earth had been turned into the largest trap in human history, and it looked completely harmless, Status report from the outer perimeter, Sarah requested. Commander Hayes, a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes, consulted his displays. All stealth platforms are active and positioned. The asteroid belt installations are fully powered and ready. The Jupiter system defensive grid is online. Mars colony is maintaining its disguise protocols perfectly. Sarah smiled at that last part. Mars colony was perhaps humanity's greatest deception. To Zephyrian sensors, it appeared to be a small research outpost with maybe a few hundred people. In reality, it housed over 50 million humans and served as the primary manufacturing center for humanity's most advanced technology. The irony was that the Zephyrians were not entirely wrong about human capabilities. Earth itself really was relatively primitive, maintained that way on purpose. The real human civilization existed in the shadows, in hidden installations throughout the solar system and beyond. Admiral, Lieutenant Torres said, we're receiving signals from the deep space monitoring stations. The alien fleet has passed the heliopause. They're officially in our solar system now. Excellent. Begin Phase 1 of Operation Mousetrap. Throughout the solar system, thousands of hidden installations began subtle adjustments to their camouflage systems. Not enough to be detected, just enough to create the faint sensor shadows that would guide the alien fleet exactly where humanity wanted them to go. The Zephyrians had no idea they were being herded. On his flagship, Commander Zexathari studied the tactical displays with growing confusion. Their sensors were detecting strange readings throughout the system, but nothing that made sense. Space itself seemed to shimmer occasionally as if the very fabric of reality was unstable here. Navigation officer, he called. Are we experiencing sensor malfunctions? Negative, Commander. All systems are functioning normally. The readings appear to be some kind of natural phenomenon. Perhaps electromagnetic interference from the local star. Zexathari was not satisfied with that explanation. In 3 centuries of space travel, he had never seen anything quite like what his sensors were showing him. Objects that appeared solid one moment and empty the next. Energy readings that spiked and vanished without explanation. Reduce speed by half, he ordered. I want full sensor sweeps of everything larger than a shuttle. Back on Command Station Omega, Sarah watched the alien fleet slow down with satisfaction. They're getting nervous, good. Hayes, what's our count on identified vessels? 2,700 standard warships, 280 heavy cruisers, and 20 planet crackers. Exactly what our intelligence predicted. Sarah had been tracking Zephyrian fleet movements for decades. She knew their tactics, their capabilities, and most importantly, their limitations. The Empire had grown lazy over the centuries. They relied too heavily on their technological superiority and had stopped innovating. Their weapons and shields had not improved meaningfully in over 500 years. Humanity, by contrast, had spent those same centuries in a frenzy of scientific advancement. While the Zephyrians conquered primitive worlds, humans had been unlocking the fundamental secrets of reality itself. Ma'am, Specialist Park announced, the lead elements of their fleet have reached the outer asteroid belt. They're beginning to detect our installations. On the tactical display, Sarah watched as Zephyrian sensors finally began to identify the massive structures hidden among the asteroids. What the aliens thought were mining facilities or research stations were actually weapons platforms, each one more powerful than an entire Zephyrian fleet. Commander Zexathari felt his 4 hearts skip a beat as his tactical officer delivered the impossible report. Sir, we're detecting artificial structures throughout the asteroid field. Large ones. They appear to be. Weapons platforms, how many? Over 3,000 confirmed contacts, Commander. And they're powering up. Zexathari stared at the display in disbelief. The structures were massive, far larger than anything a primitive civilization should be capable of building. And the energy readings coming from them were beyond anything in the Empire's databases. This is impossible, he whispered. These readings indicate technology more advanced than our own. His communication officer looked up with fear in his large black eyes. Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the 3rd planet. Put it through. A human voice, calm and professional, filled the bridge. Zephyrian Fleet, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Forces. You are now entering a restricted military zone. For your own safety, I suggest you stop where you are and prepare to receive surrender terms. The bridge fell silent. In the Empire's entire history, no one had ever offered them surrender terms. Zexathari found his voice. Impossible. You are primitives. Your technology is thousands of years behind ours. The human's laugh was soft but cold. Commander, you've been watching Earth for 6 months. In all that time, did you ever wonder why a species capable of interstellar communication would still be using chemical rockets? The question hit Zexathari like a physical blow. It was such an obvious inconsistency that he had never thought to question it. Species either developed all advanced technology together, or they remained primitive across the board. A civilization with interstellar communication should have developed advanced propulsion centuries ago, unless they wanted you to think they hadn't. The structures you're seeing in the asteroid belt, Admiral Chen continued, are just the beginning. Your sensors are currently detecting about 5% of our actual defensive installations. Would you like to see the rest? Before Zexathari could respond, space around his fleet began to change. Structures materialized from nowhere as stealth fields deactivated. Weapons platforms the size of moons appeared among the asteroids. Energy readings spiked to levels that should have been impossible. But most terrifying of all was what happened to the space around Earth itself. The planet seemed to shimmer, and suddenly the Zephyrian sensors could see the truth. Massive orbital installations surrounded the world like a metal shell. Energy conduits stretched between them, forming a web of power that could have supplied entire star systems. Earth was not a primitive world, it was a fortress. The moment that would be remembered across the galaxy began not with weapons fire or explosions, but with silence. In command centers throughout human space, technicians made final adjustments to devices that had taken a century to build and position. Admiral Sarah Chen watched the countdown timer on her main display reach 0. Around her, the command staff of humanity's greatest military operation held their breath. This was the culmination of 300 years of preparation, 50 years of active planning, and 6 months of careful positioning. All stations report ready, Commander Hayes announced quietly. Quantum field generators are at full power. Dimensional anchors are locked in place. Reality modification protocols are loaded and standing by. Sarah nodded once. Execute Operation Godfall. Across human space, from hidden installations buried in asteroid cores to massive platforms floating in the depths between solar systems, humanity activated technology that would redefine what was possible in the universe. The weapon was not a gun or a bomb or anything the Zephyrians would have recognized as dangerous. It was something far more terrifying, a coordinated adjustment to the fundamental forces that held reality together. On his flagship, Commander Zexathari watched his instruments with growing horror as impossible readings cascaded across every display. Space itself was changing around them, and there was nothing in 3,000 years of Zephyrian science that could explain what was happening. Report, he shouted over alarms that were blaring throughout his ship. Sir, we're detecting massive quantum field fluctuations throughout local space. The electromagnetic force constant is changing. Gravitational fields are becoming unstable. The strong nuclear force is... The sensor officer's voice cracked with fear. Sir, the laws of physics are breaking down. But they were not breaking down randomly. Dr. Elena Vasquez, monitoring the operation from her laboratory on Command Station Omega, watched her displays with the calm satisfaction of someone whose calculations had proven exactly correct. Field. Stability is holding at 97%. She reported to Admiral Chen. The quantum modification field is expanding at light speed as predicted. All Zephyrian-controlled space will be affected within 4 minutes. What humanity had discovered through centuries of patient research was that the laws of physics were not truly laws at all. They were more like agreements, patterns that matter, and energy followed, because that was how the universe had always worked. But with enough knowledge and power, those agreements could be temporarily rewritten. The Zephyrian Empire had built their entire civilization on technology that required very specific physical constants to function. Their energy shields needed electromagnetic fields to behave in predictable ways. Their faster-than-light drives depended on stable space-time geometry. Their plasma weapons required consistent nuclear forces. Humanity was about to take all of that away. On a Zephyrian destroyer near the edge of the fleet, Captain Mordesh watched in stunned silence as his ship's main display flickered and died. Around him, his crew reported system failures cascading through every major system. Engineering reports power core instability, his second-in-command announced. The plasma containment fields are losing coherence. Switch to backup systems. Sir, the backup systems are failing too. Actually, sir, all of our technology appears to be stopping. It was an inadequate word for what was happening, but there was no better way to describe it. The Zephyrian energy shields, which had protected their ships for millennia, simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not overloaded, just gone as if they had never been there at all. Their weapons powered down as the nuclear forces that held plasma together were subtly adjusted. Their engines went silent as the space-time fields they manipulated were locked into new configurations. Their communications died as electromagnetic radiation was prevented from carrying information in the ways their technology required. Commander, Zexathari felt his flagship shudder as the massive vessel's systems began failing one by one. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically at controls that no longer responded to their touch. How long will this effect last? He demanded. His chief scientist, an elderly Zephyrian named Kelnara, looked up from her readings with eyes wide with terror. Commander, based on these readings, the effect appears to be permanent. They have changed the fundamental constants of reality itself within a sphere of space encompassing our entire empire. That's impossible. So I would have said yesterday, sir. Today I am watching it happen. But the humans had not made their changes permanent. Dr. Vasquez monitored the countdown timer that showed exactly how long the quantum modifications would remain in place. The operation had been designed with precision, long enough to disable every piece of Zephyrian technology completely, short enough to avoid permanent damage to the fabric of space-time itself. 3.7 seconds. That was all the time humanity needed. In those seconds, every Zephyrian ship in the galaxy found itself powerless. 3,000 years of technological advancement became as useful as stone tools. Ships that had crossed between stars drifted helplessly as their engines died. Weapons that could crack planets became silent metal sculptures. Most critically, life support systems throughout the Zephyrian fleet began to fail. Admiral Chen watched the tactical display show 3,000 red contacts, all showing dead in space. No power, no weapons, no shields, no movement. Casualties? She asked quietly. Minimal, reported the medical monitor. Most Zephyrian ships carry emergency atmospheric reserves sufficient for several hours. Their people are alive, just helpless. That had been important to the humans. This was not meant to be a massacre, but a demonstration. The message needed to be clear. Resistance was not just futile, it was irrelevant. When the quantum field modifications ended after 3.7 seconds, normal physics returned to Zephyrian space. But by then, it was far too late. The damage was done not to their ships, but to something far more important, their understanding of their place in the universe. Commander Zexathari sat in his command chair, staring at displays that were slowly coming back online. His ship's systems were functional again, but what he had experienced in those few seconds changed everything. Status report, he said quietly. All systems are operational again, sir. But Commander, his tactical officer paused. Sir, we have detected approximately 15 million human vessels decloaking throughout Imperial space. 15 million ships. Not the 3,000 that the Empire had brought to conquer Earth, but 15 million vessels that had been hidden throughout Zephyrian territory for decades. They had been watching, waiting, positioning themselves for this exact moment. A new voice came through the communication system, broadcasting to every Zephyrian ship simultaneously. It was Admiral Chen, but her tone had changed from professional courtesy to absolute authority. People of the Zephyrian Empire, what you have just experienced was a demonstration. For exactly 3.7 seconds, we adjusted the laws of physics in your space to make your technology impossible. We could have left those changes in place permanently. We chose not to, because our goal is not your destruction, but your understanding. Commander Zexathari closed his 4 eyes and felt something he had never experienced before in his centuries of life. Complete and total defeat. Your empire is ended, Admiral Chen continued. Not by conquest, but by the simple reality that you exist now only because we permit it. The age of Zephyrian domination is over. The age of freedom begins now. The communication reached every world that had ever suffered under Zephyrian rule. It came not as a military broadcast, but as a message of hope transmitted simultaneously to billions of oppressed beings across 800 star systems. People of the galaxy, Admiral Chen's voice carried clearly across space. "You are free." On the mining world of Kepler 442b, the Thaxian slaves stopped their work in the deep tunnels and looked up at speakers they had never heard deliver good news before. For 3 generations, their people had dug precious metals from their planet's core, while Zephyrian overseers took everything of value. "The Zephyrian Empire no longer exists," the human voice continued. "Their fleet has been disabled. Their technology has been proven obsolete. Their ability to threaten you has ended forever." Elder Krixtal, the unofficial leader of the Thaxian resistance, felt tears streaming down his scaled face. Around him, thousands of his people emerged from the mining shafts, looking up at a sky they had not been allowed to see freely in decades. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On industrial worlds, factory workers stopped their forced labor and walked outside for the first time in years. On agricultural planets, farmers looked up from fields that had fed only their oppressors and realized the food they grew might finally feed their own children. But the most dramatic changes occurred on the imperial capital world of Zephyr Prime. Governor Thelnaki, the highest-ranking Zephyrian official on the planet, stood in his crystal tower overlooking a city that had been built with the wealth of 1,000 conquered worlds. Around him, his advisors waited for orders that he could not give. "Sir," his communication chief reported nervously, "we're receiving reports from every system in the Empire. Our fleets are reporting complete system failures. Our governors are requesting emergency reinforcements. Our military commanders are asking for instructions on how to surrender." The word surrender had never been spoken in the Imperial Palace before. For 3,000 years it was a word that others said to them, never a word they needed to understand themselves. "How is this possible?" Thelnaki asked quietly. "How does a primitive species disable an empire that spans nearly 1,000 worlds?" Dr. Elena Vasquez, speaking from Command Station Omega, addressed the galaxy with the answer. Her voice was gentle but firm, the tone of a teacher explaining a lesson to students who needed to understand their mistake. "The Zephyrian Empire made the error that all empires make eventually," she said. "They believed that their current superiority would last forever. They stopped learning, stopped growing, stopped questioning their assumptions about the universe." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of centuries of human experience. 300 years ago, the Zephyrian Empire attempted to conquer Earth. They failed, but they never realized they had encountered us at all. They found our world mysteriously abandoned and assumed we had fled. They never investigated further. That failure of curiosity was the beginning of their end. The truth was both simpler and more complex than most could imagine. Humanity had not hidden from the Zephyrians 3 centuries ago. They had fought them and won, but they had done so carefully, making sure their victory looked like mysterious accident rather than military defeat. Captain Marcus Webb, now serving as humanity's primary liaison to the former Imperial worlds, explained the strategy to a gathering of confused and frightened Zephyrian officials. "You see, we learned something important from that first encounter," he said, standing in what had once been the Imperial throne room. "You are not the only threat in the galaxy. There were other empires, other potential conquerors. If we had revealed ourselves as powerful enough to defeat you, we would have simply attracted bigger enemies." The Zephyrian officials listened in stunned silence as he continued. "So we made a different choice. We let you think you had scared us away. We let you continue your conquests. And while you were busy ruling your empire, we were busy becoming powerful enough to free everyone you had enslaved." Webb gestured to a display that showed the true scope of human civilization. Hidden installations in deep space, secret colonies on rogue planets, massive industrial complexes disguised as natural phenomena, an entire technological civilization that had grown in the shadows while the Empire basked in its assumed superiority. For 3 centuries, we watched you conquer world after world. We cataloged your crimes. We studied your tactics. We prepared for this day. Every world you enslaved, we secretly contacted their resistance movements. Every species you oppressed, we quietly supported. Every act of cruelty your empire committed, we remembered. On distant worlds, the truth of this statement was becoming clear. Resistance fighters who had struggled for decades with primitive weapons suddenly found themselves in possession of technology that made Imperial equipment look like toys. Freedom movements that had been barely surviving discovered they had powerful allies who had been helping them all along. the Kalari rebels on Proxima Centauri. He looked in amazement at the supplies that materialized in their hidden bases: advanced weapons, medical equipment, communication devices, and food supplies that would feed their people for years. "How long have you been helping us?" asked Commander Veltar, a Kalari who had fought the Empire for 30 years. The human operative who delivered the supplies, a woman who had lived among them for a decade disguised as a simple merchant, smiled. "Since the day your people first took up arms against oppression. We have never forgotten that freedom is worth fighting for, even when the fight takes centuries." Back on Zephyr Prime, Governor Thelnaki struggled to comprehend the scope of humanity's deception. "You have been planning this for 300 years? "Planning is the wrong word," Captain Webb replied. "We have been preparing for it. There is a difference. We hoped it would never be necessary. We hoped your empire would change, would learn to coexist peacefully with other species. We gave you 3 centuries to prove that hope was justified." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a note of sadness. "You chose to remain conquerors instead of becoming partners. You chose exploitation instead of cooperation. You chose to rule through fear instead of leading through example. In the end, you made this demonstration necessary." The word demonstration hung in the air like a weight. That was all it had been to humanity: 3,000 years of Zephyrian technological development, rendered useless in under 4 seconds, as casually as someone might turn off a light. "What happens now?" Thelnaki asked quietly. "Now you learn what it means to be free," Webb replied. "All of you. The species you conquered will choose their own governments. The worlds you exploited will control their own resources. The people you enslaved will determine their own destinies. And us? The Zephyrians?" Webb considered this carefully. "That is up to you. You can choose to join the galactic community as equals, contributing your knowledge and culture alongside everyone else. Or you can choose to fade into history, clinging to dreams of an empire that no longer exists." He stood and walked to the great window that overlooked the capital city. Below, crowds of Zephyrians wandered the streets, trying to understand what their world had become. "But understand this," he said quietly. "The age of empires is over. Not just yours, but any empire that might arise in the future. Humanity will be watching, and if anyone anywhere decides that conquest and oppression are acceptable, they will learn the same lesson you learned today." The message was clear, and it would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. There were now forces in the universe that would not tolerate tyranny, and those forces had the power to end any oppression they chose to end. 1 year later, the First Galactic Council convened on the former Imperial capital world, now renamed simply Council Prime. Representatives from over 300 species gathered in a great hall that had once hosted only Zephyrian nobles and their conquered subjects. Captain Marcus, Webb stood at the central podium, looking out at an assembly that would have been impossible just months before. Thaxians sat beside their former Zephyrian overseers. Kalari rebels discussed trade agreements with species they had never been allowed to contact. Former slaves debated policy with former masters, all equal under the new galactic charter. 1 year ago, Webb began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. This room was a symbol of oppression. Today, it represents something the galaxy has never seen before, a truly free assembly of equals. In the front row, former Governor Thelnaki listened carefully. Over the past year, he had learned more about freedom than in all his previous centuries of life. The transition had not been easy for his people. Many Zephyrians had struggled to adapt to a world where their wishes were not automatically granted, where other species were not required to serve them. But some had adapted well. Thelnaki himself had become an advocate for the new order, traveling to former imperial worlds to help smooth the transition to self-governance. He had discovered that earning respect was more satisfying than demanding obedience. "The question we face today," Webb continued, "is not how to govern the galaxy. No single government should have that much power, as the Empire proved. The question is how to ensure that freedom, once won, is never lost again." Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as humanity's chief scientific advisor to the Council, stood to address the assembly. "The answer lies not in weapons or fleets, but in knowledge and cooperation. Today we are announcing the establishment of the Galactic Knowledge Initiative." The great display screen behind her lit up with images of schools. laboratories and communication networks being constructed across hundreds of worlds. Every species in this galaxy has unique knowledge, unique perspectives, unique solutions to the challenges we all face. For the first time in millennia, we have the opportunity to share that knowledge freely without fear of conquest or exploitation. A Thaxian delegate raised her scaled hand. Dr. Vasquez, many of my people fear that sharing our knowledge will simply enable new conquerors to emerge with better weapons. A valid concern, Elena replied. Which is why the initiative includes safeguards. Certain technologies will remain restricted, shared only with species that have demonstrated their commitment to peaceful coexistence, and humanity will continue to maintain the capability to intervene if anyone attempts to use shared knowledge for conquest. The implication was clear without being threatening. Humanity remained the most powerful force in the galaxy, but they had chosen to use that power to protect rather than to rule. Ambassador Krixtal of the Thaxian Republic stood to address the assembly. His people had suffered under imperial rule for 3 generations, but now they were building their own civilization according to their own values. 1 year ago, my grandchildren worked in the deep mines, believing they would never see the surface world freely. Today they attend schools where they learn not just to serve others but to think for themselves. They study the stars not as distant lights, but as places they might one day visit as explorers, not slaves. His words drew applause from dozens of species who had similar stories to tell. This transformation was possible only because humanity chose to use their power differently than any empire before them. Krixtal continued. They could have conquered us just as easily as they defeated the Zephyrians. Instead, they chose to free us. Webb nodded respectfully. Freedom was never ours to give. It was always yours by right. We simply removed the barriers that prevented you from claiming it. In the months since the Empire's fall, humanity had indeed proven their commitment to freedom over dominion. They had shared advanced medical technology freely, ending plagues that had ravaged some worlds for centuries. They had provided educational resources, helping species develop their own technologies rather than becoming dependent on human innovations. Most importantly, they had refused all requests to establish permanent human colonies on liberated worlds. Every species deserves to control their own destiny, Admiral Chen had said, including the destiny of their homeworlds. Representative Mordek of the former Zephyrian fleet spoke from his seat near the back of the chamber. He had been a ship captain in the Imperial Navy, one of thousands who had found themselves without purpose when their empire ended. Captain Webb, he said, many of my people still struggle to understand their place in this new galaxy. For millennia, we defined ourselves through conquest and control. Now we must learn to find meaning through cooperation and contribution. It is difficult. Change always is, Webb replied gently. But your people have knowledge and skills that the galaxy needs. Your experience with large-scale organization, your understanding of interstellar logistics, your engineering capabilities, these are valuable contributions to the galactic community. The question is not whether you have a place here, but how you choose to use your talents. Over the past year, many former Imperial personnel had found new purposes. Some became teachers, sharing their technical knowledge with developing worlds. Others joined humanitarian missions, using their organizational skills to coordinate disaster relief efforts. A few had even joined human exploration fleets, helping to chart unknown regions of space. As the council session continued, delegates addressed the practical challenges of building a free galaxy. Trade routes needed to be established between worlds that had never been allowed to interact directly. Communication networks had to be expanded to include species that had been forbidden to speak to each other. Legal frameworks were required to resolve disputes between civilizations with vastly different cultures and values. But beneath all these practical concerns lay a more fundamental question. Could freedom really last? Webb addressed this concern in his closing remarks to the assembly. Freedom is not a gift that can be given once and preserved forever, he said. It is a responsibility that each generation must choose to accept. The Zephyrian Empire lasted 3,000 years, because most species found it easier to accept oppression than to fight for freedom. That cannot happen again. He gestured toward the great window that looked out over the bustling city below, where once only Zephyrian nobles had walked in luxury, while slaves labored hidden from view. Now beings from hundreds of worlds moved freely, conducting business, sharing ideas, building the future together. The galaxy you see today exists because ordinary beings on 1,000 worlds chose to resist tyranny, even when resistance seemed impossible. It exists because some chose to help others find freedom, even when that help required great sacrifice. It exists because we all decided that no single species has the right to rule over others. 3 months later, on Earth itself, children played in the same parks their grandparents had played in, under the same blue sky. The difference was that now they learned about the galaxy beyond their world not as a distant dream, but as a community they were part of. The deception was finally over. Earth was no longer maintained as a primitive-appearing world to fool potential invaders. The hidden installations had been revealed, the stealth fields deactivated, the true scope of human civilization displayed openly for any who wished to see. But the values that had driven humanity to maintain that deception remained unchanged. Children still learned that power should be used to protect, not to control. They learned that true strength came not from the ability to conquer, but from the wisdom to know when not to use that ability. And in classrooms across Earth, teachers told the story of the day the Empire declared war on their world and fell in a single moment. Not as a tale of human superiority, but as a reminder of what was possible when beings chose cooperation over conquest, patience over aggression, freedom over fear. The lesson was simple, and it echoed now throughout the galaxy. The greatest victory was not in defeating your enemies, but in turning them into allies. The strongest empire was not one built on conquest, but one founded on the simple idea that every thinking being deserved the chance to determine their own fate among the stars. In the end, humanity had won not by being the most powerful species in the galaxy, but by being the first to understand that true power meant knowing when not to use it at all.